We cut to a cabin in British Columbia, where Bruce receives Betty's necklace through the mail. He puts it in an envelope addressed to her. Somehow he was able to get Betty's necklace mailed to him so that he could return it to her. It's a small moment meant to tie up that loose end, but it doesn't help that the necklace was a poorly set up plot device in the first place. Anyway, Bruce starts meditating. His heartbeat speeds up, and days without incident drops down to 0. He opens his eyes, green, and smiles. At the start of the movie, Bruce was doing everything he could to suppress and get rid of the Hulk. Now, after successfully using him to help people, he purposefully unleashes him. He has come to believe that Hulk can be a force for good, and has embraced him as part of himself. This is further evidenced by Bruce being able to Hulk out without the need of an external pressure. He doesn't need to be beaten up, he doesn't need to see a loved one get hurt, he doesn't need to get shocked in the brain, and he doesn't need to plummet 1,000 feet into concrete. He can transform simply by closing his eyes and willing it. He is finally in control. But maybe don't do that inside. He's definitely gonna wreck the place.
When he's opening his eyes and he's in control and you know he's gonna transform, but in control, and you see his smirk, is he a good guy, is he a bad guy?
Yeah.
And if he's a good guy, we go and do Hulk 2. And if you want him to be a bad guy, that could be the Avengers.
Okay, but there's nothing in the movie to suggest Bruce in control of Hulk would be a bad guy. Bruce and Hulk have only ever shown a desire to help people. This scene brings the movie full circle. We begin with Bruce meditating to prevent the Hulk, and we end with Bruce meditating to unleash him. It's an obvious way to show how his character has changed. The scene is great. It would suck if another MCU property shamelessly ripped it off. Our final scene is a conversation between General Ross and Tony Stark, which will eventually be recontextualized to make more sense. It has little bearing on the current movie. And that's the end. Looking at the movie overall, I find it interesting how each character can largely be defined by how they view the Hulk. For instance,
I don't know.
Stearns views the Hulk as a scientific marvel and a source of limitless potential. He is motivated to help Bruce by his curiosity and the promise of grand accomplishment. The Hulk drives him to reckless and unethical action, culminating in the creation of the Abomination and his own mutation.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
The Hulk's width is rather large.
Betty views the Hulk with compassion and sympathy. She holds a deep love for Bruce, which allows her to view Hulk as an extension of him. Despite the extreme changes in appearance, the terrifying power, and the bestial, instinctual behavior, she recognizes Bruce within him. While others see Hulk as a monster or a weapon or a god, Betty only sees a person. And by the end of the movie, Bruce comes to share in this view.
And I was like, am I going to be cool? Are my kids going to think I'm cool?
Blonsky views the Hulk as the embodiment of ultimate strength. He starts the movie as a normal soldier who longs for the glory of battle. He becomes obsessed with obtaining and surpassing the power of the Hulk. Over the course of the movie, this drives him to take more and more extreme action, and it erodes away at his morality along the way. By the end, he's become a monster, both inside and out, and stands as the physical manifestation of what Bruce fears the Hulk might be.
More feelings.
More feelings.
More feelings, like a little bit more emotional
I
next
don't
time.
think that's what actors are supposed to do.
Okay, here we go, guys.
General Ross views the Hulk as a dangerous weapon to be harnessed. He wants to do so to make up for the failure of his super soldier program. Ross also wants to protect Betty. These two desires end up conflicting with one another. His pursuit of the Hulk results in Betty being put in harm's way. Ross's arc is about resolving this conflict by determining which is more important to him. By the end of the movie, he prioritizes Betty's safety over protecting his career. There are some issues with this arc, though. To show you what I mean, I'll describe an instance where it works and an instance where it doesn't. In Harlem, Blonsky hurts Betty. Ross is responsible for this. He said he'd take Blonsky off the team at the first sign of side effects, but doesn't, seemingly because of how useful he is for capturing Hulk. Therefore, he is responsible for Blonsky's actions. This works great. Contrast this with the Battle of Culver University. Ross orders the gunship to fire on Hulk, and Betty is caught up in it. He nearly killed Betty in an attempt to get Hulk. The problem is, this only occurs because he miraculously lost sight of Betty, despite her literally walking towards the object of his obsession. It's absurd and hurts Ross's character. What also weakens his arc is how little the movie explores his true motivations behind capturing Hulk. For most of the movie, you might assume he only wants to create a weapon to defend people, and is willing to do despicable things to achieve this. It's only in one line from Betty do we get the implications about his career and his more selfish goal.
And action?
Bruce views Hulk as a monster that harms others. He hurt Betty and carries a tremendous amount of guilt for that. This leads him to dissociate himself from the Hulk and drives his search for a cure. There is nothing good that can come from the Hulk. Betty's influence and the threat of abomination work to convince him otherwise. He determines that Hulk is an extension of himself. They share the same desires. They both are capable of great ingenuity. They share some memories. And most importantly, they both want to help others. The movie well establishes Bruce's core traits. However, there's one aspect of Bruce's personality that I don't think is sufficiently fleshed out. It is vaguely hinted that Bruce used to be overconfident, and that it was this overconfidence that led him to experiment on himself and become the Hulk. This is only supported by the implications of one line of dialogue, and one small moment in a short flashback. Otherwise, nothing. I don't think this personality trait is adequately developed.
What do you think? Can we roll on this, guys?
Hulk views Hulk as, Hulk. Contrary to popular belief, Hulk isn't a dumb rage monster. He is capable of ingenuity in battle and actually shows an aversion to violence. He's motivated to fight to defend himself and especially to defend others. He draws strength not so much from anger generally, but from the anger felt when someone he loves is in danger. A strong theme of the movie is how power comes with a cost. There is great emphasis on how painful Blonsky's injections are, and how Bruce's transformation is an agonizing experience. Post-transformation, Bruce is left physically and mentally weak, and he's plagued by PTSD-like flashbacks. This is nicely complemented by the movie's depiction of violence. Power does not come free, and does not come without consequence. The largest issues that the movie suffers from are several large contrivances used to progress the plot. What's most disappointing about this is that the movie otherwise has great attention to detail.
I always try to give the audience the best movie possible, and it's in the details.
Even so, I'd argue that the movie's plot is nowhere near as broken as so many other MCU properties. Now, before finishing this review, I'd like to talk about some of the movie's deleted scenes. It has quite a few of them, and they include interesting material concerning the characterization of Ross and Bruce. Let's start with Ross. His deleted scenes delve deeper into his motivations, portraying them as more nuanced and meaningful than what we see in the final cut. After Brazil, Ross and Blonsky meet with General Greller to explain what happened.
You told me you were going to Brazil to nab a scientist. Another one of your super soldier experiments has gone haywire. Is there anything that came out of that program that didn't turn into a mess?
This is the concrete evidence we need to understand this facet of Ross's motivation. Ross's super soldier program is a stain on his career, which is why he's desperate to catch the Hulk. And it is this selfish motivation that puts him in conflict with Betty. In an extended conversation between Ross and Blonsky, we get more information to answer various questions the audience might ask about the plot. Like, what does radiation resistance have to do with super soldiers?
We thought it could give our boys built-in insulation against some of that depleted uranium no one likes talking about.
Why did Ross let Bruce test the serum on himself?
The politicians don't give a flying F about what real soldiers need. They like twin-rotor heliplanes that don't work while perfectly good machinery rots under their nose. So our money was running out. Banner was so sure of what he was onto that he tested it on himself. I let him.
Why has the other serum been sitting on ice this whole time?
One serum was very promising, but it was unstable. It made subjects unstable. Then Al-Haqid happened. Congress lost its nerve, and they killed it.
This last bit implies that the serum contributed to Blonsky's moral corruption. In the theatrical cut, we could only assume it was the result of Blonsky's lust for power. I think this scene's implication potentially muddles up Blonsky's arc, shifting part of the blame for his actions away from him. We see more of why Ross and Bruce clashed when it came to the idea of Hulk as a weapon.
Banner was brilliant, one in a generation, but there are people who grasp that peace and freedom derive from power, and people who don't. He doesn't.
Ross genuinely believes harvesting this power as a weapon will benefit people. I think this humanizes Ross by emphasizing an altruistic aspect to his motivations. This also makes explicit the philosophical differences between Ross and Bruce, making it clearer why Bruce went on the run. After the battle at Culver University, Major Spar and General Ross get to talking about the Hulk.
There's no training for what you saw out there. It's a new power, let loose through a crack in the cliff of nature's mystery. And how many times do you think that's happened? Fire. The splitting of the atom. The universe unveils a secret, and people recoil. And then comes the person who stops trembling, who steps forward and seizes the burning stick and says, "This will I master." And civilization's history is written by those men.
This reinforces the movie's theme, comparing Hulk to the literal discovery of fire, something dangerous yet extremely beneficial if harnessed the right way. We also get more weight to Ross's obsession. He doesn't just see a super soldier, he sees a godlike power waiting to be seized and mastered. Getting that would make up for all his failures, tenfold. Ross and Spar brief the soldiers on their way to New York. The plan is to snipe Bruce from a distance, but if he runs, they let him. Otherwise, they would risk a Hulk out in a densely populated area. He wants to capture Bruce, but won't risk hurting so many civilians. This complements Ross's earlier line.
Peace and freedom derive from power.
He genuinely cares about protecting lives.
Not much of a rematch, is it?
Unlike Ross, the risk doesn't faze Blonsky at all. He wants to face Hulk again, and doesn't care about the casualties it would cause. This provides more build-up for his actions as Abomination.
You sure about your boy?
The dog in the hunt that won't run from the bear if it shows up. If we play this right, I'll never have to let him off the leash.
We're shown more explicitly that Ross keeps using Blonsky despite the warning signs, because he's a good weapon against Hulk, making all this more directly his fault. After capturing Bruce, Ross and Betty have an extended version of their conversation.
Freedom, democracy, our way of life.
You like that?
We believe in so much. We have to start with truth or the rest of it doesn't work.
This is a meaningful accusation by Betty, because, given the previous deleted scenes, we know that Ross is genuine in his desire to protect people. Betty is basically telling him that his noble goal is meaningless, because of his despicable means. What he's fighting for is a lie, conjured to cover up a more selfish motivation. If Ross really wanted to fight for freedom and peace, he wouldn't have turned an innocent man into a fugitive, so he could use him to make a weapon. She's calling him out on his hypocrisy, which will influence his character arc. As for Bruce, we also further explore the aspects of his character left thin in the theatrical cut. In an alternate opening, Bruce travels out into the Arctic and attempts suicide, which fails when the Hulk emerges. It's a bleaker start to the movie, depicting Bruce at his lowest point. He stooped to suicide just to escape his curse, but his curse won't let him. It acts as another cost to his power. He can't even escape it by death. It's no wonder it was cut.
He tries to commit suicide. That was an important sequence, but we thought it was a little too harsh to put on the movie release, just because tons of kids go see that, and you don't want to start a movie with a suicide scene.
Without this scene, we never get to see Bruce hit rock bottom. It tinges the character in a sadness that colors his actions and motivations. The audience will always know in the back of their mind just how bad things could get for Bruce. It potentially adds more weight to his struggle. In Brazil, Bruce returns to his apartment after a run.
You know, when you hear someone at the door, go and check it out, okay? I mean, you hear all those other dogs barking, right? Don't you even want to try it? Like once or twice?
He then greets Mr. Blue with the message, "Knock knock." It's a lighthearted side of Bruce we see little of in the theatrical cut. Perhaps it was cut because they feared undercutting the seriousness of his circumstances. In the final cut, the only traces we have of this side of Bruce come from his interactions with Betty. They might have associated this jokey, lighthearted side of Bruce with the person he used to be, so we only see it after he reconnects with Betty. We have several deleted scenes at Betty's house, centering around Bruce, Betty, and Samson. Unlike the theatrical cut, Samson did go to Betty's home after she ran out of Stanley's, clearing up some of the confusion I had at this part of the movie. As Samson prepares dinner, Bruce and Betty have an extended conversation concerning the missing data. Bruce explains how he eventually heard of and got into contact with Samuel Stearns.
When I read what he had been doing, I didn't think it was possible to synthesize inhibitors that are that complex, but he's doing it by the bucket load.
His work is unbelievably brilliant.
Stearns wasn't just some scientist. He was an impressive one that seemed uniquely capable of helping him find a cure. This makes it more understandable that Bruce would put so much faith in him and his promise of a cure. About Stearns, Betty says,
He had some kind of an ethics cloud around him, but it didn't stop him.
And then later adds,
I hear he's a total anarchist.
This is great characterization of Stearns that further fleshes him out before we meet him proper. He has a reputation of anarchy and violating ethics in his work, which makes it more reasonable that he would help a fugitive with such a dangerous experiment.
Does the general know that you have this?
No, I don't think so.
He was in Brazil. He was there. I saw him.
How?
I have looked at it from every angle and it makes no sense to me. Unless it was Stearns, would he do something like that?
I hear he's a total anarchist, and I can't imagine him having any communication with him.
It doesn't matter. I have to go and see him.
This is a logical line of thought that Bruce must have had. He doesn't know about the missed drop of blood, so he doesn't know how Ross found him. Stearns is the obvious suspect. Because of that, you might wonder why Bruce would still go to him for help. This answers that. At dinner, Samson tells a funny story. Everyone laughs, but Bruce's laughter turns to tears.
It's been a long time since I felt light about anything.
You're safe here.
In conjunction with this moment in the previous scene,
I got in there as soon as I could before they took it all away. Hoped somewhere that it might tell us something someday. What?
Sometimes, hope comes back so quickly.
we're shown more of the long-term emotional impact the Hulk has had on him. He has not had the privilege of something so lighthearted as friends laughing around the dinner table in years. Like the alternate opening, we see more of the tragedy of his character. The next morning, Bruce is forced to walk because Betty left her car lights on all night. They can't be seen leaving together, so Bruce and Betty will meet up at Culver University. This may explain why they showed up there rather than at a bus stop. Except not really. Couldn't they have still met up at the bus stop to say goodbye? Also, Betty leaving her car lights on is a pretty flimsy excuse to get this to happen this way. When they arrive at Culver University, Bruce talks about the incident and the research that led up to it.
I just keep asking myself what it was we were trying to accomplish that was worth all this.
I think we were trying to understand. We wanted to advance things a little.
I think those were things that we told ourselves because we liked the way they sounded.
Nobody thought something like that was possible.
Nature takes a long time to build us. Delicate, wonderfully complicated systems refined over billions of years, and nobody understood that better than you and me. And so we did what? We come in here with these big brains of ours, and we think that we're gonna do what? Improve it overnight? And then we act surprised when it blows up in our face in some way that we didn't expect.
This is the explicit confirmation of Bruce's overconfidence the theatrical cut lacks. Bruce reflects on the arrogance at thinking they could tamper with human biology and assume something unexpected wouldn't happen. And what's more important is seeing the regret Bruce has for having acted that way, explaining why we don't see the same overconfidence in him today. And this adds to the theme of Bruce being cursed. He was reckless and tampered with something he didn't fully understand and must now live with the consequences. At the motel, after their failed coitus, Betty asks why one of Bruce's scars hasn't healed, while the others have.
No, that's mine. His scars heal, mine don't.
Bruce doesn't refer to Hulk as an it for the first time, though he still makes an effort to differentiate them. To Bruce, his scars and Hulk's scars are not the same.
His scars heal, mine don't.
Yes, they do. They leave a mark. They stop hurting. Look at me. That pain didn't last. Not knowing was so much worse. I looked for your face everywhere. I never stopped.
This scene directly addresses the guilt Bruce carries. This is Betty's way of forgiving him for it, which will later help Bruce start to see Hulk as a force that could be used to help people. not hurt them. After all, it's this guilt that colors his view of Hulk. And that's all the deleted scenes I care to talk about. There are others with interesting content, but I think these are the most important given the additional depth they provide to Bruce and Ross. If I had to guess, I'd say someone was afraid of the movie turning out too heady and flopping like Ang Lee's Hulk.
You know, we accomplished a lot of things with Ang Lee's version. It really works as a standalone story about the inner angst, the inner rage of Bruce Banner. With this one, with The Incredible Hulk, we wanted to have more fun and have more action this time around and really deliver the Hulk that we thought audiences wanted to see.
I don't think Bruce and Ross are whole people without these scenes, and the movie is weaker not having them.
It's important when you edit a movie not to be afraid of losing stuff along the way.
Maybe fear, like anger, is not always a bad thing. So, is 2008's The Incredible Hulk as bad as they say? While the scenes left on the cutting room floor show that the movie isn't as good as it could have been, the final product is far from bad. I think a mostly intact plot and largely strong characterization come together to create a quality movie. It's certainly better than most of the MCU.